Hi, welcome to another episode of About the Authors TV. I'm your host, Jake Brown. Tonight we're joined by a man that the Hollywood Reporter has declared one of the most powerful authors in Hollywood, author of bestsellers like The 10th Justice, The First Counsel, and The Escape Artist, and the I Am series. He's also host of History Channel's Decoded. Welcome, Brad Meltzer, and thank you for being on the show. Before you started writing, take us back to childhood when you first started reading. Were you raised in a house surrounded by books?
Yeah, my family, we had no books in our house growing up. There were no books. My mom read the Inquirer and the Star. She said all the real news was in that. My dad read the sports pages. The only books my parents ever wrote were the 7 books before they both died that I wrote. That's it, period. I was the first in my family to go to a 4-year college. But it was my grandmother who was a reader. My grandmother had this magical object more powerful than Harry Potter's wand, and she had a library card. And she took me to the library in Brooklyn, New York. And there was this librarian there who said to me, you know what? Here's your section. These are yours. And I truly thought she meant these are my books, like they're mine. And it was there that I met my new friends, Judy Blume and Agatha Christie. And that was obviously became the hook for me. I was always a kid who read comic books. I still read comic books nonstop. So I still read Superman, Batman, and everyone else. But when it came to actual, print books with just words, it was Agatha Christie. It was the one that changed me. I remember being there in chapter 1. It was the book was Murder at the Vicarage, and I just remember chapter 1. There was that thing, the dead body, right there, one of those early chapters, and suddenly asking that question that I've been asking myself ever since, which is, who done it? And that was where my addiction was born, and then obviously just only grew from there. I became a voracious reader.
You actually went to law school before you started writing legal thrillers. Was your original ambition to be an attorney?
No, I didn't. I had no desire to be a lawyer. I was scared because I
Oh,
didn't want to have my dad's life. When my dad was 39 years old, he lost his job and in Brooklyn, New York, and he was really bad with money. He had $1,200 to his name, and he said he was going to have the do-over of life. We were going to move to Florida. He was going to have the do-over of life. We had no place to live. He had $1,200. Uh, he had no job. My mom had no job. It wasn't one of those moments where you're scared because you just don't know where money's coming from. You're scared for your safety. You're scared because you're like, it was really terrifying for my family. And he just said, do over of life like it was a game. And we moved down to Florida. When I got to Florida, English teacher, my 9th grade English teacher is a woman named Sheila Spicer. And Miss Spicer changed my life with 3 words. She said to me, you can write. And I was like, well, everyone can write. She said, no, you know what you're doing. She said, she tried to put me in the honors class. I had some sort of conflict. She said, here's what we're going to do. You're going to sit in the corner for the entire year, ignore everything I do on the blackboard, ignore every homework assignment I give. And what she was really saying to me was, you're going to thank me later. And sure enough, a decade later, when my very first novel came out, I went back to her classroom. I knocked on the door. She said, can I help you? I said, my name is Brad Meltzer. I wrote this book and it's for you. And I handed her a copy of my first novel, The 10th Justice. And she started crying. And I said, why are you crying? And she said, I was going to retire this year because I didn't think I was having an impact anymore. And I said, are you kidding me? I said, you have 30 students. We have 1 teacher. And that was the woman who changed my life. Was Sheila Spicer was the first person beside my family who ever told me I was good at something. So obviously, and we all have in our lives that person who tells you you're good at something, that person who gives you your first real job, that person who first takes a chance on you. You owe that person forever. So when you're done listening to this, go thank them. For me, it was Miss Sheila Spicer.
art wound up imitating life in your first book, Fraternity. Tell us about the source material for that muse.
Yeah, so I went to the University of Michigan and came out of Michigan like many people come out of Michigan, which is debt to pay off. I had all this debt, and this guy named Eli Siegel said to me, here's what we're going to do. He said, don't go to law school. It's going to do you no good. He said, come work for me. I'll be your mentor. I'll take you under my wing. He was a businessman. He said, I'm going to teach you about the worlds of business and marketing. And if you love it, you stay. And if you hate it, you leave after a year with some money in your pocket. And I thought, that's a good deal, right? So I move all my stuff to Boston, move everything to Boston where he is as I graduate college. And the week I get to Boston, he leaves the job. And I thought, oh my God, I've wrecked my life. I'm like, I wrecked my life. This is it. So I did what all of us would do in situations where we think we wrecked our life. But every one of us and everyone listening I know would do. I said, I'm going to write a novel. And I knew nothing about writing novels. I had no idea what I was doing. I just had a year because I was still working at the job, but it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. So I said, everyone has one story in them. I'm going to take my shot and tell my story. But what I found is every day that I came home to write, I fell in love with these imaginary people that I was working with. And I started caring more about these imaginary friends than anything else that was going on. And I slowly, everyone says, find someone to pay you to do the thing you love. I didn't know what I loved, but when I started writing, I found it. And I just said, my first book, Fraternity, got me 24 rejection letters. There were only 20 publishers at the time. I got 24 rejection letters, which means some people were writing me twice to make sure I got the point. But I said, if they don't like that book, I'm going to write another. I was truly, the week after I got my 23rd and 24th rejection letter, I started my next book. And I said, if they don't like that book, I'm going to write another. If they don't like that, I'm going to write another. And I was young and stubborn and just basically started writing the next book, the second one, which became the first one published, The 10th Justice.
The 10th Justice, still one of your most popular classics, is available at over 1,900 libraries worldwide. Was Ben Addison based on you personally at all?
Yeah, I think it's funny. The book is about a Supreme Court clerk who inadvertently leaks a decision before it's announced to the public. And so it was this young clerk, 27 years old. These clerks are really young. I was at the time the same age. And he lives in a group home with a bunch of his, loudmouth, smart-assy friends, which is, of course, what I used to live with. And the funny thing is every one of my friends from high school says, oh, the 10th Justice, those friends, that's all us. Brad's writing us. And all my college friends like, oh, that's Brad writing us. And all my law school friends like, that's Brad writing us. And the truth is, I just always become friends with a bunch of smart Alex who, all think they're the center of the universe. And we were all of them are right in a strange odd way, because it was this amalgam of pulling that experience. And anyone who reads the book is like, I remember being in my 20s and living in that group house and just, wishing I'm ready to change the world. So I was writing that. When I wrote my first book, it was all about research. So I went to the Supreme Court at the time and I knocked on the door and said, hey, can you let me in? I'd love to research the Supreme Court. And let's just say that isn't how you get into the Supreme Court of the United States. But what I did is I had an internship. Eli Siegel, the man who became my mentor, actually wound up hiring me again. He went to Washington, hired me again during law school. And I called up from the office of AmeriCorps, the public service program. And I called the marshal's office. I said, hey, my name is Brad Meltzer. And I actually called up and I said, you know what? I have a bunch of interns from AmeriCorps that want to come down there. Can you give them a tour? And they said, sure. What are the names? I said, his name is Brad Meltzer. He'll be coming alone. And this is the crack security team that was guarding our nation's highest court. I was obviously thrilled to know that they would let me in. And I was able to really research it. And my wife introduced me to a Supreme Court clerk at the time. And I gave her my plot. I told her how I wanted it to happen. And this was long pause on the phone. I'll never forget. And she said, the scariest thing about your book is it could happen. Wow. And I said, that's the book I want to write. I always want to have that story that could really be. There's nothing that's quite as scary as a true story. And so I started from there. And that's where the 10th Justice really came to life. It's just me pulling from that research and that reality. When I started writing, the hook, the real hook of the 10th Justice, my first book, was on page 40. You got that thing that kind of cracks you in the face. This was 20 years ago, was on page 40. You can't wait to page 40 anymore. I want to hook you forget chapter 1. I want you in sentence 1. And to this day, I'm 20 years in and I'm surrounded behind me, is like all these books with my name on them. They all still feel fake to me. Anyone who tells you they're not, they're liars. I mean, it still feels like it's something that someone ran off at like Kinko's on a color copier. The thing I remember most about that is my first interview was on the Today Show. And at that point, I was so young, I didn't even know what the Today Show was. I was like, is that a good, I knew I'd heard of it, but I'm like, is that a good show? They're like, yeah, dumbass, it's a good show. And they put me on the show. And I remember we got all these incredible reviews. And they said, Vanity Fair and Time Magazine and USA Today, and telling me I'm the best thing of all time. And I was like, that's ridiculous. They're all wrong. But I remember sitting in my girlfriend's and now wife's house when we hit the bestseller list. And back then the bestseller list came on a fax machine. You'd sit by the fax machine and it would roll out. And they said, go by your fax machine. I went by a fax machine and the bestseller list came out with my name on it. And I'm not joking. I did not know until like the week before what the bestseller list was. I didn't even know there was such a thing. And they said, you're on it. And I looked at my girlfriend, now wife, and I said, let the backlash begin.
With Dead Even, did you have that one in your back pocket going into your second book deal, as so many authors do?
I was working on the second book dead even before 10th Justice came out, which was great because that means I was writing cold. But I will say that second book was the hardest book to this day I've ever written by far um, because I felt, and whether it was me putting pressure or whether there was real pressure, I don't know. But I also made the mistake of I didn't follow my passion for what I wanted that book to be. I actually pitched, my initial pitch for the book was this book uh, about Cain and Abel that I wanted to do that was like traced back to the first murder weapon that Cain used to kill Abel. I had this like kind of totally different idea about historical thrillers. And my editor said to me, we're working to put you on the bestseller list with a legal thriller. Don't screw it up. And I should have been like, I don't care. I'm going to write what I want to write. But I was new and I was, like just out of debt. I was paying law school debt and college debt when all this happened. And I was so scared to have my dad's life and to have those money struggles. I said to my editor, you got it. I should have said, I'm doing what I want, but I caved faster than anyone in the history of caving because I didn't want to lose it. I didn't want to mess up. And it was the hardest book. I remember at the time, David Baldacci became a friend of mine, and he took me to lunch. And it was the first writer I knew. Now it's easy to find writers on Twitter and on Facebook and everywhere else, but back then you didn't really. I didn't know any writing. I didn't grow up with any writers. I didn't know writing was a job until I got to college. And he said to me, we were sitting at lunch. I'll never forget. And he said to me, "If it was easy, Brad, everyone would do it. It's okay to admit it's hard." And it was like this light bulb went off, and I just said, thank you for that. And once he said that, I was okay and kind of plowed forward. But I felt so lucky to have the job I had, that someone was paying me to talk to imaginary people. I felt like I would be a complete jackass if I was complaining about it. I felt like it would be so thankless if I ever complained about it. But I just didn't want to ever say a bad word because I felt like that was just being a jerk, and I didn't want to ever be the jerk. So he kind of gave me the freedom to know that I wasn't alone in feeling that, and that was actually hugely helpful to me.
One of your most enduringly popular characters is first daughter Laura Hartson from the First Council. Was she one of your favorites when you first conjured her up?
It's one of my favorite too. When people ask me what to read, I always say this in The Escape Artist. But so that book, The First Council, was the third book that came out. And my publisher, actually, the second book didn't do well. It did not do well at all. The first book went out, was this blockbuster, blah, 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 what they call it. The second book, the sales plummeted. And I was terrified. The publisher shut down. I was like, this is the end. It's all over. And I just said, I'm going to write the book I want to write. And I was going to write a White House thriller about the president's daughter. And the week I got all my interviews set up, this little scandal broke in the White House at the time by the name of Monica Lewinsky. Scandal broke. And every door slammed in my face. No one wanted to talk to anyone when that happened. And I'll never forget, the Washington Post did this huge story in the style section that basically said, like, only a fool would be working on a White House thriller right now because you can't beat reality. And I remember reading that paper and going, oh my gosh, I'm the fool. That's me. But it's been a good part of a year researching and writing the book, and the book finally came out. And, again, it takes a long time for these things to play. So 2 years after this all happens, the book comes out, and this tiny show comes on the air called The West Wing. And we were like a week or 2 or 3 later after The West Wing, our book came out. And suddenly, again, just dumb luck, right place, right time, the White House became the place again. Everyone was interested. And I was the only person that had a book about the White House and the inner workings of it from the first family's perspective. And I got lucky. It wound up being, it sold in a way that we never, ever anticipated. And I remember calling my mom when everything shut down. I'll never forget. I called my mom. I'm like, the publisher shut down. The book's not doing well. We lost our contract. Like, what do we do? And I remember my mom said to me, I'd love you if you were a garbage man. And she wasn't anything she prepared. My uncle was a garbage man. She wasn't taking cracks at garbage men. But it was just her true feelings in that moment. And that was strength to me. And so it just kind of, unlike the second book, I was like, I'm writing what I want. I don't care if no one wants to buy it. It's what I want to write. And the reason you love Nora as a first daughter, this dangerous, sexy first daughter who gets into trouble, is because that was the most interesting character on the planet to me. And you feel it in chapter 1. It's maybe my favorite, beside The Escape Artist, my favorite chapter 1 I think I've ever written was that opening chapter of that book. And she just came from researching for a year all presidents' kids, talking to a former president's daughter who was willing to speak with me, and just throwing myself into that crazy universe and the microscope that kind of lights on fire when you live in the White House.
What do you consistently try to pack into an opening chapter of a Brad Meltzer book? It just pulls readers in every time.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's what I want. I write for one person, and it's for myself. And what I want is, I want the author's passion. There is no answer. And some people tell you, oh, you need a good murderer, you need a good this, you need a good character. What you're really feeling in your favorite book, whatever your favorite book is the author's passion for that project. The book you love most, the author, it feels like there's a train leaving the station, and the author's basically saying, we're leaving. We don't care if you come, we're going. And you want to jump aboard. And to me, that's the X factor in every book. Does the author love what they're doing? And if they love it, you'll feel it on the page. And if they hate it and they're writing their 20th book with their 20th old character that they hate, you're going to feel that too. And it's why so many people are like, oh, I love that author's first book, but then they got okay. Like, why? Because the authors are bored. And so for me, what I want to put in that first chapter is everything that I love. Like, if it's going to be, a death, it's going to be that death I can't wait to tell you. If it's going to be a character, it's that character I can't wait to share. Whatever excites me the most is what goes in chapter 1, period. And that is, there's no rule. There's no, you couldn't chart the books that I've written and say, like, here's the formula. Like, there's a murder on this. And then sometimes I introduce the character. Sometimes it's the place. Sometimes it's the plot. Sometimes it's the bad guy. But it's just that thing that I'm most excited by it.
Turning specifically to the Book of Fate and the Book of Lies, it was brilliant the way you wove together all these historical events in your own original spin. What was the original concept for that? When did it first hit you?
So for me, every book has to, again, come from the need of the most important story I want to tell. That's what I learned over the years, is like, it doesn't matter what you write about. I stopped writing about the law. I was like, I don't care what I write about. I'm going to write about what I want. And I got, when the first council came out, I got a letter from former President, he was actually the White House at the time, but President Bill Clinton. And then I got another fan letter from President George H.W. Bush. And I remember thinking that I knew I was going to get the Clinton one because someone warned me that he had read the book, or that he had gotten the book. And I'd seen him, and he was, he knew the book. But when I got President Bush's letter, I thought, oh, this is fake. It can't be real. And I called the office. I was like, yeah, someone here is like trying to get a free book. They asked for a signed copy. Like, oh, you got the president's letter. And I was like, wait, this is real? And they said, yeah, it's real. And so I started writing back to President Bush, and we became kind of pen pals, and we were writing letters back to him. And he said, you know what, why don't you come? I became fascinated with that idea that this guy is so bored right now that he's writing to me, right? Like, you're the leader of the free world, and then the next day you got to stop at red lights like the rest of us. And what is that like? What is it like where in your life that you peaked? If I told you today that whatever point you've reached right now, you'll never get any higher. You'll be as important as you'll ever be, as engaged as you'll ever be, that you've reached your peak. There's very few people you ever know that, but presidents do. And I was fascinated with, like, what do you do when you're done with that? What does that do to your psychology? And there's only 6 people on the planet who knows what that story is like, but I happen to have access to one of them. So I wrote to President Clinton, I wrote to President Bush. I said, can I come see you? And they were both kind enough. President Clinton had me come up to his office and talk to staff there. President Bush said, why don't you come to Texas and hang out for a week? And I had unprecedented access to him and Barbara Bush. May they both rest in peace, became dear friends. But the Book of Fate was about this story. I found this story about the Freemasons and the codes that Thomas Jefferson used when he was president. I remember writing to President Bush, and I said, I remember hearing the story that when Ronald Reagan left the White House, he put a secret note in the desk and left it for President Bush. Bush left a note for Clinton. Clinton left one for W, and the tradition hopefully continues. And I said, could you put a secret code in there? And President Bush, a letter came back by email that said, the president wants you to have this. And it was actually, for the very first time, released to me, the secret note that President Bush 41 left for Bill Clinton. If you've seen it on the internet, when it goes around, the reason it's out there is because he gave it to me. And I went on Good Morning America and released it to the world. But I remember when I got it, I was like, oh my gosh, did he put a secret code in this? I checked every fourth letter to see if it was like a secret Freemason code. Did the first letter of every word spell out, I hate you, Bill? Like, what is he sending me? But it was just a really amazing, gracious, and wonderful note. But the Book of Fate came from out of that interaction with these former presidents that just made me obsessed with this universe. I want to hook you forget chapter 1. I want you in sentence 1. The Book of Fate opens with, it opens 12 minutes of now, one of them will be dead. They had no idea it was coming. That's a hook. I was like, that's my hook. That's what I want. They're going to be dead. No one knows it's coming. That's like sentence, 2. And I think that as a short attention span society, we have kind of slowly made it so that we don't, no one wants to wait to page 40 anymore. Give it to me now. And then the Book of Lies was me finally having the faith in myself to go back to that original idea and finally saying, you know what, I have the murder weapon that Cain used to kill Abel. And I was fascinated with what that is. Some people say it's a stone, some people say it's a rock. I won't tell you what I think it really is. You'll see in the book. I don't want to ruin it. And how it could tie into the creation of all things Superman. I love Superman. And I believe that the most important part of the story is not Superman. The most important part of the story is Clark Kent, because we're all Clark Kent. We all know what it's like to be boring and ordinary and wish we could do something beyond ourselves. And I said, I know this will sound crazy, but I want to write a book that is about the world's first murderer, the world's greatest villain, Cain, from Cain and Abel, and how it ties into the story of the world's greatest hero, Superman. And the publisher, to their credit, said, go at it, have at it. And I love the fact that it's one of our best reviewed books that we've put out there. And it was just me just saying, I don't care about what the genre is. I don't care about what anyone likes. I love this part of history, and I'm just going to just roll myself into it. The reason I wrote about it is because I was at a book signing in Florida, and I was talking about my love of Superman. And this guy stands up and says, I served in the Army with Jerry Siegel, who's the writer who created Superman. And another woman at the same exact book event, only in Florida, crazy Florida, stands up and says, oh yeah, Jerry Siegel's my cousin. I'm like, I got two people of the creator of Superman that are tied together in this one little book signing in Sarasota, Florida. And when the universe gives you gifts like that, you take them. I wrote down both their numbers. And the woman said to me, I want to tell you that Jerry Siegel's father, the creator of Superman's father, he died in a robbery. Everyone says he died from a heart attack. He didn't. He died in a robbery. And no one ever investigated it. And I'm happy to tell you the secrets of the actual. This is a real true story, real crime. And I'm like, you're telling me that the creator of Superman's father dies and in a robbery, and weeks later, he invents a bulletproof man. And when they ask him where he gets the idea from, he never once says, my dad just died in a robbery, never keeps it secret for this entire time, 80 years. And she was nice enough to invite me into her family, into her world. And it was incredible, and gave me the true, you'll see in the book, the true story of how Jerry Siegel's father actually died and how it led to the creation of Superman, this true real life robbery.
Your books always take readers behind the scenes, and you took us into the world of banking with the millionaires. When did that idea first fascinate you enough to want to write a book about it?
Yeah, it's funny. I probably would have told you a great lie when that book came out, because my early interviews are all just like me trying to keep everything safe and just always worried about, again, saying anything bad that I would mess up with. And I know that Charlie and Oliver, of course, were done in tons of research and again, throwing myself into it. But when I look back 20 years later, I honestly believe, Charlie and Oliver they were both me, but they were different versions of my life. One was like this kid who was like rough around, both from Brooklyn, which is what I was. And one is completely street smart and one is completely book smart. And those are the two versions of me at that time. Like, I know I got to go to this, I got to go to college for the first time, for my family to go to a 4-year college. Like, that was a huge deal to me, but you can never take the Brooklyn out of the boy. You can never take the street smarts out of the kid. And everyone's like, oh, you have this great law school pedigree, you have all this stuff, and I'm like, you can put whatever you want on my resume. You'll never change who I am. And it was me kind of, I think, struggling to try and figure out who I am. And that's where they came from. The beginning of that book, though, came from a buddy of mine and this is a true story. This was the opening scene of the book, but he told me he was he worked in financial services work. And on a Friday at like 4:00 in the afternoon, his phone rings, and it's a very, very, very wealthy person who I know who it is. And I promised to this day I would never say who it was. Calls him up and wants to be on the Forbes 400 list of the 400 richest Americans. And he says, I want to make sure I'm on that friggin' list. And my bank accounts that they look at doesn't have the money in it. So can you transfer the money to this account? Because that's the one they're looking at. And I got to make it look big. And so my friend's like, let me get my boss. The boss can't be reached again. It's pre-cell phone days. So he's freaking out. He's like, let me do it. He's like, if you don't effing get this from me, I'm going to fire all of you now. So my friend goes scrambling. He's like, I'll get it, figures it out, finds where everyone is, transfers the money, millions of dollars, transfers like $10 million to one account to another. And his friend says to him, right as he hangs up, he's getting this all done. He goes, That's great, but can I ask you a question? Are you sure the person you were speaking to was actually the person you were speaking to? And my friend crapped his pants, right? He's like, oh my God. And it wound up being correct. He did it right. He did it correctly. But in my hands, that was the opening scene for a thriller. And I love that moment where Charlie and Oliver, Charlie, suddenly he sees what his brother's doing. Oliver's got to be is the one who gets the phone call, and they're racing around. And needless to say, The Millionaires as a book takes off from that true story.
Was the Zero game really one you found out from your congressional sources was played on Capitol Hill?
I did. So this is book 4, book 5, and I was an intern. My very first internship ever was in the Senate Judiciary Committee, and I remember we all knew this story that there were 2 staffers who used to make bets on, like, could they get these could they slide a word into a bill? Could they mention something? One of them trying to one up each other, said, "I bet you can't put the words dry cleaning in your senator's speech." And his buddy says, "You want to bet?" And the next day in his speech, it says, "Although many people think the environment is an issue that is dry, cleaning it is our top priority." And I love that story. I love that story that again, young people on Capitol Hill are gambling and screwing around with the congressmen and the senators and that they work for. And the Zero game was about that, is a game being played at the highest levels where staffers are literally gambling on Congress. I did not make it up. It was absolutely real. I just made it into a thriller.
What was the reaction in those circles as so many of those people read your books?
I know. The funny thing was, I just saw a very famous senator on right before the election was on, I forget if it was like Fox or MSNBC, and she had a copy of the Zero game behind her on her shelf. And I was like, because I always scour like shelves, like scour mine, like you'll see only like, and I saw, and I was like, oh my gosh, she's got the Zero game, which I love, because I did hear from staffers and congressmen and senators and congresswomen who would tell me, like, obviously I exaggerated what they were doing and raised it to the levels of murder, but they were like, we know. Everyone was like, we know. It was great.
You travel with readers all the way back to George Washington's dictionary in the Inner Circle. What first made you want to dig into that one?
I got a call in the midst of writing the Book of Fate and Other Things. I got a call from the Department of Homeland Security asking me to come in and brainstorm different ways that terrorists could attack the United States. Wow. And my first thought was, if they're calling me, we have bigger problems than anybody thinks, right? I was like, if you think the country's screwed up now, just wait, right? I was like, we are really screwed now. But I was honored to do it. And I went in, and they would pair me with a Secret Service agent and a chemist. And I would come up with my crazy way into the place we were looking to, destroy. And the chemist would say, no, let's use this chemical. It'll dissipate less quickly in the air. And the Secret Service person would say, no, go in this door. There's less security here. We would destroy a major city like Washington, D.C. in an hour. And you go home terrified. You don't go home thrilled. You're like terrified because you see how easy it is to kill us. But I was honored to do it. But the only thing I was struck by is, why'd they call me? They could call anybody they want in the whole country. Why'd they pick a novelist? And I traced it back through history, and it traced back to a man named George Washington. That George Washington, back during the Revolutionary War, had his own secret society made up of regular, ordinary people, the Culper Ring. And it was made up of regular, ordinary citizens. You know why? Because George Washington knew that no one looks twice at an ordinary person. And I said to my friend in Homeland Security, wouldn't it be cool if you found out that George Washington's spy ring still exists to this very day? And he said to me, what makes you think it doesn't? And I said, that's a good idea for a book. And that is the story of The Inner Circle, The Fifth Assassin, and The President's Shadow. It was the first trilogy I ever wrote. And it was all about what happens if George Washington's secret society still exists to this very day, and his spy ring still exists to this very day. And those 3 books all encompass that. It was interesting. I never had done a recurring character. I think about Nora, I think about Ben Addison, I think about Oliver and Charlie, but I'd never really thought about bringing a character back until Beecher. And it was hard. It was fun, and it was hard because I personally don't want the character to be the same. I want him to grow. So how do you make a character grow when you already had a book where he grew, and then you got another book where he grew, and then how do you keep changing them and making it so it's interesting, so it's not just setting up the same toys and just knocking them over again. It was a great learning process for me, and I worked hard on it. The second book I struggled with, and the third book I loved because it just kind of all came together. But it taught me how to, even though I had written Batman and Superman and these other characters, there was nothing like writing your own recurring continuity.
What was special for you about writing Hazel Nash, the lead protagonist in House of Secrets?
I appreciate it. I'm full credit to my, Todd Goldberg, who I wrote the book with. It was the first time I ever worked with another writer, and I knew I had the plot. I always knew exactly. I knew her. I mean, the book, So I hosted at the time a TV show called Decoded on the History Channel, which was about chasing conspiracies down. And the main character of the book, Hazel, her father, had a TV show that was about chasing conspiracies down. So I clearly was pulling from the furthest stretches of my imagination to come up with the plot for this book. Um, but it was Todd and I getting together and meeting together and really being able to pull her apart. We did a lot of work with a great brain specialist who really told us about what memories really do, and if you do lose them, it's not like when you watch on 70s television and someone has amnesia and they're like, who am I? Like, it was, we really, really tried to figure out what is this really like when you lose your memory, and what happens when you want to recreate yourself. Like, you find out that the person you were is not a nice person. And I think it gave her a depth that, truthfully, I learned a lot from. I learned a lot from Todd writing that book, because plot comes more naturally to me. I have to work harder at character. Todd was the opposite. Character comes more naturally for him. He has to work harder at plot. And I think we both, hopefully, I knew, speaking for myself, I got a wonderful crash course. And I think it's what led me to The Escape Artist, is being able to kind of fully bring together character and plot for the first time.
Our next guest is television host and best-selling author whose new book, The Escape Artist, is available Tuesday. Please welcome back to the show, Brad Meltzer, everyone.
I understand Nola and Zig from The Escape Artist are another two of your personal favorite characters that you ever written?
Yes, for me, I've done a lot of work with the USO, and I've been able to be, the USO invites a couple of thriller writers. I think there's like 5 or 6 of us every year. They used to, when the war was at its height, to go to Afghanistan, go to Kuwait, go to Qatar, go to all these places and entertain our troops. And they asked me to go to one of the rounds, and I was honored to do. We went to Qatar, we went to Kuwait, we went to Oman, we went to Turkey, all over it was incredible. And it was there that I heard about this place called Dover Air Force Base. And I was struck. Dover Air Force Base is where all of our fallen soldiers, when they're killed in action, where their bodies go. So the men and women who take care of those bodies, the morticians who take care of those bodies, are incredible, amazing people. They will literally rewire someone's jaw for 12 hours and smooth it over with clay because a family wants to see their son one last time in an open casket. They'll rebuild someone's hand for hours because a mother will whisper to them that their last wish is to hold their son's hand one last time. These are the best of us working on the best of the best of us. And I thought, that's what I need. And that's where I got Zig from, this mortician who buried his own daughter and now tries to find solace and closure for himself by helping other people who are burying their kids. And this incredible person who buries the members of our troops. And Dover is also a place, because they're burying not just our troops, our active troops, but they're burying our spies, our secret squirrels around the globe, the CIA, and all over the world. It's a place that's filled with secrets. They know your secret identity when your body comes in. And I was like, that's a great place. And I went to Dover, and I met, people who helped me build Zig as a character, because I would watch them in real life. And there is actually a real life Zig name. I named him after him. Of course, he's nothing like my character, except for the sense that he loves doing what he does. And I said to him, the new thing I wanted is, I said, I know this is what I want. I said, I want to have some kind of secret message that's found on a body, that the body comes in, and I don't know if it's on a tattoo or in someone's pocket, but do you ever have a secret code that might have come in? And he said, this person I was talking to said to me, I should say, if you're on a plane, this is true, if you're on a plane and your plane's about to crash, if you write a note and you eat the note, that the liquids in your stomach will actually protect the note upon the crash. And I said, that's a great idea. He said, and they said to me, it's not a great idea, I should say. They said, it actually happened. And I was like, it actually happened? And I said, that's the plot of the book, is my character Zig, a body comes in, it's this young woman, and he knows this young woman. She grew up in Girl Scouts with his daughter, so he wants to take care of her. She's dead. Her name is Nola Brown. Nola Brown is dead, and he's going to show her the respect and dignity she deserves. And he opens up her body, and there's a note inside her stomach from the plane crash she was on. And the note says, Nola, you were right. Keep running. And he realizes this woman on her burned from the plane crash isn't Nola Brown at all. Nola Brown's not dead. This isn't her. She's alive. She's on the run. She's the escape artist. And obviously, I knew I had chapter 1. That was, to me, like a great, exciting, amazing chapter 1. And I just ruined chapter 1 of The Escape Artist for you. But I could have started the book right there, but I finally learned and said, don't start the book until you have NOLA. Don't start the book until you have NOLA. And I was doing research, and I was in this military museum, and they had all these paintings on the wall. And they had paintings from Adolf Hitler. They had paintings from generals. They had all these different paintings. I'm like, why does the US Army have all this art? And they told me that since World War I, the US Army has actually had a painter on staff, an actual painter painting disasters, who paints disasters when they happen. Whether it's storming the beaches of Normandy, whether it's on 9/11, whether it's in Vietnam, we have always had a painter who is documenting in just paint. And I'm like, you're telling me that everyone else is running with machine guns and we have someone running with paintbrushes in their pocket? And I said, that's the craziest job I've ever heard. I got to meet him. I want to meet this guy. It sounds like a lunatic. And they said, you mean her. You want to meet her. And I realized it was a woman. And I was like, that's where Nola Brown, our hero of the book, was born. And I said, I got it. I spoke to the real Nola Brown. And suddenly Nola and Zig came to life. And they are, to this moment, my favorite characters I've ever worked on. It's why the new book is a sequel to The Escape Artist, and gets to take care of their next adventure.
With Heroes for My Sons, Heroes for My Daughters, what was your selection process like for the stories that made their way into that book?
On the night that I was born, my dad bought a bottle of champagne, and he said, I'm going to open up this bottle of champagne on the night my son gets married. And when my son was born, I didn't care about champagne. I'm a writer. I like books. So I said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a book that's going to last his whole life. And one day I'll give it to him, and I'm going to fill it with the advice I have for him to be a good man. And one day I'll present this book that I wrote to him. He will say, thank you, Father. You are indeed the greatest dad of all time. And the book was garbage. It was terrible. It was like just telling your kid to be good and expecting that to work. But a friend of mine, Simon Sinek, told me this amazing story about the Wright brothers. He said every time the Wright brothers would go out to fly their plane, they would bring enough extra materials for multiple crashes, which means every time they went out, they knew they would fail. And they would crash and rebuild and crash and rebuild. And that's why they took off. And I love that story. I wanted my son to hear that story. I wanted my daughter to hear that story. I wanted everyone to know if you dream big and you work hard and you have a good side order of stubbornness, you can do anything in this world. And that's the book I wanted to write. Not a book of rules, but a book of heroes. So we did Heroes for My Son, we did Heroes for My Daughter. And really it led to the entire Ordinary People Change the World series of just wanting to write write illustrated children's books for my kids about these amazing heroes. People reacted so well to the book that we said, let's do more. And we started doing the entire I Am series. I Am Amelia Earhart, I Am Abraham Lincoln, I Am Rosa Parks, Albert Einstein. And we just started going from there.
Your wildly popular I Am book series has earned you a whole new generation of young readers. What are a few of your favorite books from the beautiful illustration side of that process?
Yeah, so I do these with an amazing artist and genius named Chris Eliopoulos. And Chris has this beautiful art style that's a little bit like Charlie Brown meets Calvin and Hobbes. He is the secret weapon for these books. So, when we started the series, I told my daughter about Amelia Earhart. I was like, Amelia Earhart is amazing. You're going to love her. She flew across the Atlantic Ocean. Isn't that wonderful? And my daughter was like, big deal, Dad. Everyone flies across the Atlantic. She was not impressed at all. But when I told her the true story, that when Amelia Earhart was 7 years old, she built a homemade roller coaster in her backyard. That she took a wooden crate, she put roller skating wheels on the bottom of it, and she shoved it up to the roof of her tool shed. And then she came flying down the side and flew through the air and crashed and says, that was amazing, or whatever she yells at the time. My daughter was listening, and now I had her. So we started with I'm Amelia Earhart and I Am Abraham Lincoln, I Am Rosa Parks. My son loves sports. I was like, you know what? Forget millionaire athletes. Why don't you do this when I wrote I Am Jackie Robinson for him? And each of the books is designed to give and teach my kids a great value, whether it's kindness or compassion or perseverance or that thing that is just lost today is character. And we did I Am Lucille Ball because I wanted my daughter to have a female entertainment hero who wasn't just famous for being thin and pretty. That Lucy stood for the idea it's okay to be different. It's beautiful, in fact, to be different. And we did I Am Helen Keller. But this amazing thing happened during the 2016 election. And that was as Hillary and Donald Trump were arguing every night on television, two of our books started selling more than any others. And they were I Am Martin Luther King Jr. and I Am George Washington. And it wasn't a Democrat or Republican thing. It was that parents and grandparents on both sides were tired of turning on the TV and seeing politicians when what they wanted to show their kids were leaders. And we all know there's a huge difference between a politician and a leader. So I love the fact that people now use our I Am series The Ordinary People Change the World series, to fight back against the cynicism in society. So we've done I Am Walt Disney, we did I Am Marie Curie, we did I Am George Washington. As I said, we did Gandhi and Sacagawea, and I love doing these books. We just did I Am Anne Frank and I Am Benjamin Franklin, which is, been just a joy to put out into the universe, give the world a little bit more hope, because who better than Anne Frank can teach our kids hope? And so Chris is the reason people love the books, as I said, is because Chris is art. I mean, I want my kids off their phone. I want them off their screens. The only way it happens, you got to give them something better to look at. And Chris's art is just that magical. In fact, listen, I'll put the proof where the pudding is, right? Like, let me show you. You show me what's better. Here, I'll put one there.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I can write whatever I want, but it's Chris who's the star, right? You see Albert Einstein like this, and kids go like, oh, he's cute. He's just like me. And that's the magical thing. We show them when they're kids. So these aren't the stories of famous people. This is what we're all capable of in our very best days.
Over the course of the 2 seasons that Brad Meltzer's Dakota ran on the History Channel, millions of viewers got to know you as a TV host. What did you most enjoy about stepping into that role?
Yeah, I got the show because of the books. One of the heads of the History Channel said they had read the Book of Fate, and they'd seen the Freemason codes and the Thomas Jefferson codes, and they said, we want to do a show like that. And I was like, well, that's just a ripoff of, you can't just make a show like this. It's got to be about something. You got to, it can't just be like, let's do the Freemasons. Like, what is it about? And they said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, I don't know. I said, the very first piece of the White House was put down in a Freemason ceremony. I said, but within 24 hours, the stone went missing. So why don't we try and find it, or at least try and figure out where it might have gone? And they were like, can you do more of those? And I was like, yeah, I got a lot of those. So the truth was history just let me have a run at it. And all the things that I wanted to figure out and didn't have a team for, I suddenly had an entire television show of producers and researchers to let us get to those amazing stories. And obviously we love doing that. We just did the Dakota book that just came out in paperback after 10 years. And that show was a huge, amazing reward for me. Just, it was so rewarding to do because, we all have phones, we all have information, but the hardest thing to find today is the truth. And I love the fact that we didn't go out to fearmonger, we didn't go out to just play spooky music and scare you. We tried to find the truth, and that was the goal of every episode.
What were 2 or 3 of your favorite mysteries that you actually decoded in the episodes?
I love doing the Lincoln conspiracy, the secret plot to kill Abraham Lincoln with John Wilkes Booth. The family of John Wilkes Booth actually reached out to me and said, we have information on John Wilkes Booth that no one knows. He did kill Abraham Lincoln, but 12 days later, when they shot a man, 12 days later, that wasn't John Wilkes Booth. Our relative actually got away. We have the proof of it. Would you like to hear our story? I was like, yes, I want to hear that story. And so we did an episode of that. It was one of my favorite episodes we've ever done. I love doing D.B. Cooper. We found some really cool stuff in D.B. Cooper. We did a lot. We had a lot of fun with that show. I miss that show. I was just talking about it with a friend the other day. So thank you, friend, for me.
Any favorite episodes from your other History Channel show, Brad Meltzer's Lost History?
Listen, we got to find the 9/11 flag that the firefighters raised at Ground Zero. Of all the things I've ever worked on in my life, that might have been the most rewarding because, it brought closure to people. Everyone knows the famous photograph from 9/11. But no one knew the flag went missing. And we used the TV show to say, hey, someone out there has it. Can you find it? And the week after, 3 days after the show aired, a man walked into a fire station in Everett, Washington, and said, I saw the show Lost History. Here's the 9/11 flag, and I want to bring it back. And it took us a year to authenticate it, but I got to unveil it in the 9/11 museum where it's still currently on display. Again, one of the most humbling moments of my entire life was to be a part of that.
You were also a co-creator producer on the Jack and Bobby show on WB Network. How did that gig first land in your lap?
It was my first time ever doing it. We had an idea for a television show, my friend Scoop Cohn and I, and we just had a blast. And we had from Claire Berlin and all the other people. There were a lot of people who weighed in on that idea. I can't even, begin to tell the story in these final moments, but you saw what a collaborative process it was. And we had an incredible cast. We had, Bradley Cooper was on the show and Matt Long and Logan Lerman and John Slattery and Christine Lottie. I mean, the casting directors were geniuses. They found all these incredible people who wound up being all over Mad Men and all over these other shows. And I love the fact that we got to do that with, our friend Greg Berlanti. I mean, it wound up being we were kids with a television show. So we were just thrilled to be there.
On a completely different side of the creative map, what have you most enjoyed about writing comic books like Batman, the Justice League, and Buffy the Vampire Slayer?
Listen, I'm a super nerd who loves Batman and Superman since I'm a little kid, and DC Comics came to me and said, "Do you want to have a new Justice League and you can pick whoever you want and have Justice League #1?" Yes, I want that. Like, that is what I want. So again, I loved it. I loved every day. I still love. I just did a story with Jim Lee for the Medal of Honor Museum, that we just did a Batman story. And when the page comes on your computer and you wrote something, and then here's a giant drawing of Batman that you imagined, and it's even better than you imagined because someone like Jim Lee is drawing it. I love writing my books, but when I get to write Batman and put words in Batman's mouth, I'm wearing my underwear on the outside of my pants that day. That's the best day of work.
You must hear moving stories from parents and kids alike on book tour about how your books have made reading more exciting. Do you have any personal favorites?
People are amazing. I mean, we have people, a woman who named her baby after me because the last book she read with her, she lost her son and buried her son. And the last book that they read, actually, it's funny, of all things I'm holding, it was this book. I just realized as I'm holding it. She had read I Am Albert Einstein with her son who died, and said, it was the last great moment I had with my son who died. And we got copies of it sent to her son's class, and she went in there and we surprised her, and it was an incredible story. But then when she got pregnant again and her new son was born, she said, we named our new baby after two of our heroes. Meet Finn, after the character Finn in Star Wars, but meet Finn Bradley. And I was like, oh my God. So, I mean, our readers have been so supportive. They come, they'll buy they'll bring comics, they'll bring nonfiction adult books, they'll bring the kids' books, they'll bring their families now. And they'll be, the husband will be like, I watch you on TV. My wife reads your fiction. I read your nonfiction for adults, and my kids read your kids' books. And these amazingly beautiful whole families. It is so meaningful to me.
For the next generation of kids that may want to follow in your footsteps, or else adults that are fans of your books, do you have any advice for how they should get started in the business?
I don't know the answer. I can't tell you how to act in your own life. I can tell you what works for me. Please. And this is probably the perfect place, the perfect close, really. So I was telling you in the beginning about my 24 rejection letters, right? 24 people told me to give it up and say that was it. The truth is there were 22 rejection letters, and 23 and 24 were people that were actually interested in the book and had me meet with them. I went to New York and I met with them. I had these big meetings, and my agent told me that these two editors, they're going to bid on the book, and we're going to make some money, and you're going to get your first published book. And I was so excited because, again, I was in so much debt at the time. I just wanted to be out of the debt. And she said, be by your phone again, pre-cell phone. So I waited by the phone at a certain hour, she told me. And I picked up the phone thinking she was going to tell me, here's how much we sold it for. And I picked up the phone all excited. And I picked up and she said, sorry, kiddo. And my heart sank. And I will tell you, that was one of the most crushing days of my professional career. But every day, for 20 plus years now that I sit down to write, I recreate that moment in my head. We all have kind of our rituals that we go through. But I recreate what kind of phone I was holding. It was one of those see-through ones where you could see the wires inside because it was like high tech at the time. I picture the Formica desk on my left. I picture with the swivel lamp that everyone has in college. On my right is a bed in a box spring. There was no headboard. I picture the balcony that I'm looking over, and there's a parking lot, and on the left there are 3 doors for a fire station. I count those doors, 1, 2, 3, and then I say those words she said to me, sorry, kiddo, because I always want to know what it's like to be 24 years old and have nothing. And I never, ever want to think I made it, because the moment I think I made it, I'm done. I always want to be as hungry as I was that day. And for 20 plus years now, every single day that I sit down to write, I say it, sorry, kiddo, sorry, kiddo, sorry, kiddo. That is what grounds me and inspires me and moves me. And I never, ever want to forget that feeling.
Brad Meltzer, thanks again for being on About the Authors TV.